In every neighborhood governed by a homeowners association, there are stories that pass quietly between neighbors. Stories of fines over mailbox colors, warnings about lawn length, or confrontations over where one parks their car. But this story begins with something far more personal. Starts with a simple gate. A gate that was mine to open, mine to close, and mine to protect. When I moved into this neighborhood, I already knew it came with an HOA. Like most homeowners, I weighed the pros and cons. The glossy brochures spoke about community harmony and preserving property values, but the rumors swirling from current residents painted a darker picture. They all pointed to one figure, the HOA president, a woman who had built her reputation on intimidation, excessive rules, and personal vendettas. Her name was known throughout the cul-de-sac, whispered with either fear or contempt. But I was not like the others who tiptoed around her demands. The property I bought was a little different. Unlike the neatly packed homes, my house sat on a larger lot, bordered by old oak trees and a long driveway that curved around to a side gate. That gate had been there for decades, sturdy iron with a weathered lock, and it was one of the reasons I fell in love with the place. Gave me privacy, gave me a sense of control. And for me, privacy was not a luxury but a right. The very first week, I noticed the stares. Neighbors who barely made eye contact with me still found ways to glance nervously toward my property. I soon learned why. The HOA president did not take kindly to people who acted without her blessing, and in her mind, closing a gate was some form of rebellion. She had grown used to walking the neighborhood as if it were her kingdom, inspecting homes, snapping pictures, leaving warnings tucked under doormats. She thrived on access, on the illusion that she was in charge of every square foot of land inside the neighborhood boundary. So when she first approached me, clipboard in hand, the air already thick with the arrogance she carried, I knew a confrontation was inevitable. She began with her usual charm, if you could call it that, masking hostility with a rehearsed smile. She questioned why I kept the gate locked. She hinted that gates discouraged the feeling of community. And then she delivered her favorite line, one I would come to hear repeated. In this neighborhood, we do things my way. I remember that moment clearly. My hand on the gate, her figure framed in the sunlight, demanding compliance. That was when I made my choice. I shut the gate slowly, firmly, and with finality, right in her face. The sound of iron clanging into place seemed to echo across the street. For the first time, someone had drawn a line she could not cross. Her expression shifted from smug superiority to raw indignation. And with that, the war began. What followed was a series of petty attacks. Notices appeared in my mailbox accusing me of unauthorized alterations to the property, though nothing had changed. Threats of fines escalated weekly. One morning I discovered my trash cans knocked over, the contents spilled across the driveway. Another evening I caught her snapping pictures of my backyard from the sidewalk, her flash betraying her nosy presence. It would have been enough to unsettle most homeowners. Many before me had caved, paying fines just to avoid the hassle, bowing their heads in submission to her control. But I was different, because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I was not just another homeowner. I had been quietly working on something much bigger, something that would flip the balance of power in this neighborhood forever. For months before I even moved in, I had studied the HOA's structure, its leadership, and its financial stability. I discovered cracks in its foundation, debts piling from years of mismanagement, and a desperate reliance on outside investors to keep the community afloat. When the opportunity presented itself, I bought into that debt. Piece by piece, I acquired leverage until the day finally came when I was no longer just a homeowner. I was, on paper, the very landlord of the land the HOA depended on. But I hadn't revealed that card yet. Timing was everything. For now, I let her play her games, let her dig her own grave with every petty act of harassment. And when she called the cops, oh yes, she did, it only made the story sweeter. That day came faster than I expected. It was a quiet Sunday morning when she arrived again, pounding on the gate, furious that I dared to live outside of her reach. I heard her voice rising, demanding I remove the lock, demanding I obey her rules. I ignored her, sipping my coffee, knowing what was coming. When the police arrived minutes later, lights flashing in the stillness of the neighborhood, the other residents peeked through their curtains, watching the scene unfold. She stood proudly, gesturing toward my gate, spinning a tale of a rogue homeowner violating HOA standards. She expected the officers to side with her, to force me into submission. But the law works differently than HOA politics. The officers, professional and detached, listened to her rant before knocking on my door. I met them calmly, documents in hand. I explained my property boundaries, showed them my rights, and watched as their expressions shifted from curiosity to clarity. They informed her, not me, that I had every right to close and lock my gate. The look on her face was priceless, shock mixed with fury, a realization that her authority had limits. But still, she had no idea who she was truly dealing with. She thought this was just a battle over a gate. She had no clue that the very ground she stood on, the HOA board she presided over, was already under my control. That revelation would come later, and when it did, it would break her. For now, I let her storm off, fuming, plotting her next move. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers about what had happened. Some cheered quietly, relieved someone finally stood up to her. Others worried about the storm to come. And as I watched her retreat down the sidewalk, rage fueling every step, I knew the game had only just begun. The gate was not just a barrier of iron. It was the symbol of a larger war. And while she believed she still held power, she was about to learn the truth, that the real landlord of her kingdom was me. The stage was set. The battle lines were drawn. And the moment of reckoning was closer than she could ever imagine. The days following the police visit were thick with tension. The HOA president, humiliated in front of the neighborhood and undermined by the very officers she thought would back her up, was not about to let things rest. For someone like her, power wasn't just a title. It was her identity. And when that identity was threatened, she became dangerous. Word traveled quickly. Neighbors whispered in driveways, at mailboxes, and during evening walks. For the first time, the myth of her absolute control had been cracked. People saw with their own eyes that she could lose, that her word was not law. And while some silently rejoiced, others feared the consequences. Because if there was one thing everyone knew about her, it was that she never forgot a slight, and she never forgave defiance. Her retaliation began subtly, as it often did. Memos appeared in my mailbox, each stamped with the HOA's emblem, demanding urgent compliance with vague violations. One claimed my lawn had grown beyond regulation length, though I had mowed it that same week. Another accused me of improper lighting, pointing to a motion sensor lamp by my driveway that had been there long before I moved in. Each notice threatened escalating fines, written with the cold detachment of legal jargon designed to intimidate. But I saw through it all. These weren't rules being enforced. They were weapons aimed directly at me, crafted to wear me down until I submitted. What she didn't realize, though, was that I had prepared for this. Every piece of paper she sent me was documented, filed, and added to a growing folder of evidence. I wasn't just defending myself, I was building a case. Her second tactic was social pressure. She tried to rally neighbors against me, knocking on doors, spinning tales of how I was a troublemaker, threatening the harmony of the community. I saw her speaking in hushed tones to families on the street, pointing toward my property with that familiar look of disdain. Some neighbors avoided me afterward, too afraid to take sides. But a few offered quiet nods of support, small acts of courage in a place where silence had long been the rule. The breaking point came one Friday evening. I returned home to find an official-looking notice taped directly to my front door. In bold letters, it declared I was in violation of multiple community standards, and that the HOA would be taking legal steps if I did not comply within 30 days. It was signed personally by the president, her name scrawled across the bottom like a challenge. To the untrained eye, it looked serious, threatening, final. To me, it was desperation written on paper. And it confirmed what I already suspected. She was losing control. But she wasn't done yet. The very next week, she escalated again. Early one morning, I heard the sound of gravel crunching under unfamiliar tires. Looking out the window, I saw a tow truck idling near my driveway. The driver hesitated, confused, while the HOA president pointed furiously at my parked vehicle, insisting it was in violation of community parking rules. What she hadn't counted on was my preparation. I stepped outside with documents in hand, waving the title of my property and proof of my rights as the true owner of the driveway. The tow truck driver, clearly uncomfortable, wanted no part in the dispute. Within minutes, he drove off, leaving her standing there, red-faced and sputtering. Another attempt, another failure. The neighborhood watched all of this unfold. Curtains shifted. Doors cracked open. People were seeing her for what she really was. Not a leader, but a bully desperate to cling to power. And with every failed attempt to break me, her authority slipped further away. But while she wasted her energy on harassment, I was making my move in silence. The HOA board, those who supposedly shared her power, were already entangled in the web I had woven months earlier. Through carefully timed investments and acquisitions, I had become the largest holder of the HOA's outstanding debt. It wasn't glamorous, and most wouldn't even understand it, but on paper it gave me leverage. Leverage she didn't even know existed. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to reveal it. That moment came sooner than expected. At the next scheduled HOA board meeting, tensions were already running high. Residents, emboldened by her recent failures, began to voice their frustrations. Questions about budget mismanagement, unexplained fee increases, and selective enforcement of rules filled the room. For the first time, she was on the defensive, her usual authority cracking under pressure. I sat quietly in the back, listening, observing, letting the storm build around her. She tried to regain control, slamming her gavel, insisting she was protecting the community. But the faces around her told another story. Doubt was spreading. And that was when I decided to act. When she turned her attention to me, calling me out as the disruptive homeowner causing division, I rose to my feet. The room fell silent. Neighbors leaned forward, sensing something was about to happen. I pulled from my folder a stack of documents, the very evidence of my ownership, my investments, and the financial strings that bound the HOA to me. Her eyes narrowed as she realized too late what was happening. She had spent weeks trying to paint me as the enemy, all while standing on land that was, in truth, mine. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to humiliate her. I simply laid the papers on the table, letting the weight of the truth do the work. The board members exchanged nervous glances. Whispers rippled through the room. The president's face drained of color as she struggled to comprehend what it meant. I was not just a homeowner. I was, legally and financially, the landlord of the very HOA she claimed to rule. Her kingdom had already been conquered. She was only just finding out. The room erupted. Questions, disbelief, accusations flying in every direction. And as she sat frozen, her gavel trembling in her hand, I knew the tide had turned. The gate had been the spark, but this was the fire. And the president, once untouchable, was about to watch her empire collapse. The HOA president's downfall did not come in one sudden strike. It unfolded slowly, like a crumbling wall that had long been cracking beneath the surface. After the meeting, the whispers turned into open discussions. Neighbors who once feared her began to speak more freely. They questioned why their fees kept rising while their streets showed no improvements. They wondered why violations seemed to apply to some but not others. And more importantly, they asked why the president had never revealed the mounting debt that tied their HOA's future to an outside investor. That outside investor was me. The truth spread quickly, faster than she could contain it. Within weeks, the board called for a vote of no confidence. The woman who once strutted through the neighborhood as if it were her personal kingdom now sat silently, unable to stop the motion. She was removed from her position, stripped of her title, and left with nothing but the bitter memory of her own arrogance. I never gloated. I didn't need to. Her own actions had written the script of her downfall. All I had done was turn the page. And yet, as I looked out over the neighborhood, I couldn't help but reflect on the nature of power. She had abused hers, using rules as weapons and neighbors as pawns. I had countered with silence, patience, and strategy, revealing my hand only when the time was right. Some might call it justice. Others might call it revenge. But one thing was certain. The balance of power had shifted forever. The gate that started it all still stands. I lock it every evening, not out of spite, but as a reminder. A reminder that privacy, respect, and boundaries are worth defending. A reminder that bullies often fall hardest when they meet someone who refuses to bend. And a reminder that sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the greatest power. The neighborhood has changed since then. Without her iron grip, people feel freer, lighter. There's less fear in the air, fewer anonymous notes tucked under doormats, fewer confrontations on sidewalks. The HOA still exists, of course, but it serves the community now, not the ego of a single person. As for her, she moved away not long after losing her seat. The same neighbors who once avoided eye contact now speak of her with disbelief, as if wondering how they ever let one person control them so completely. Time, it seems, has already begun to erase her shadow from the streets. And yet I leave you with this thought. Was this true justice, or was it simply my version of control replacing hers? Did I restore balance to the neighborhood, or did I just tip the scales in my favor? You decide. What do you think? Was it justice that the HOA president was brought down by her own arrogance? Or was it revenge that I became the landlord who silenced her once and for all?